this is Lainey Cameron. I am really excited. This is the second in my series of talking to women memoirists, women who've actually taken the bold move of writing their stories as memoir rather than fiction, which takes some guts, some bravery. Hey, Selimah.
Hi.
And we're going to be talking about your book called Since I Lost My Baby, which I read, and it is riveting. I tell you, I couldn't put this thing down. Well done.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So what inspired you? Talk to me about this. Tell us about the memoir and why you decided to write it.
Well, if you know anything about the music of Motown, the story, the title of the book, Since I Lost My Baby, is a very famous song by the Temptations from the 60s. And it kind of spoke to a couple of the issues that are in my book, which is that I had my daughter taken away from me when I was 16 years old and gave birth. And then I found her again when she was 24 years old. And in between that was the 60s and the 70s. And I was really looking for love and the big truth. And I've been trying to write, I've been writing my story since I was a teenager through journals and things like that. So this was an opportunity that I had to finally put it together in a book and see it come to publication.
And it's getting such great reviews. I'm going to put my own one up this week. 5 stars, loved it. But let's take a look at just one of those reviews. This is from Denise Burt on Amazon. And I love how she captures the energy of your book for me. The idea that it's vivid life experiences, love, loss, redemption, gripping honesty. I couldn't agree more. But also it's humorous, right? At moments it's heartbreaking, but it's also humorous. I mean, you must feel really good about these kind of reviews.
Oh, I've been so gratified. And the thing that's been the most gratifying for me, I know I've had a life that's like Forrest Gump meets Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But what's the most gratifying to me is people who've really enjoyed my writing, because anybody can have like an interesting story. In fact, one of the biggest jokes at a writers' conference I went to was when people ask you, why are you writing a book? They say, well, I've had such an interesting life. Everyone tells me I should write a book. That's like, not enough of a reason. You've got to be a writer too, just otherwise you're just producing a resume. So right. It's been extremely gratifying to know that the work that I put into it, writing, is really what's getting people, not just the story, because the story gets you in, but it's the writing that keeps the reader reading. So I'm really super grateful for that.
I loved your use of metaphors. Like there's certain metaphors like living on the river Denial that make your way all the way through the book, right? And to the level that you can refer back to the metaphor without repeating it, which is amazing. Right. And I've seen people in fiction use metaphors in a way that they show up, in a chapter and get repeated. But I don't know that I've actually read a book that does such a good job of taking metaphors through the entire book and being able to refer back to them at the very last chapter in a way that makes perfect sense and is really flawless.
Well, thank you. That comes from the prologue of the book, which is it really comes from my childhood, where we never talked about anything, but which is kind of typical of a lot of kids my age. But where it really starts out in the book is when after I was locked up for having a baby, sent to a home for unwed mothers, and then had my baby taken away. When I was finally released, they told me, just go home and pretend it never happened, like after having a baby. And so that just continues on the story. And you said about it being part of like a fiction story. That's how I learned my craft, was studying novel writing. And I don't think you should ever give up those techniques or that craft because you're writing a memoir. It's the same thing. You want to keep the reader engaged. That's the only thing that matters. What does it take to keep a reader reading? You've got to have all the same elements.
And I loved the idea for me that you were looking for, I might not pick the right word, meaning, spirituality. You were trying to find your place in the world over this period of 20 years. And you were finding it in music, right? You were finding it in dance. You were finding it in songs. And yet also, if you look at the music you're talking about and kind of soul and Motown type music, it doesn't always take you in the best places, right? It says the guy's going to be mean and he's going to slap you around and he's, you know, you're going to beg for his forgiveness at some point. And like, I'd never even thought about that. The concept that these lyrics of these songs could be so deeply impactful that they could actually lead a life in a particular direction.
Well, probably nobody ever took Motown lyrics as literally as I did. Like, I could never love another after loving you. You know, I could beg and plead for your sympathy. You know, I don't mind because it means so much to me. You know, that kind of thinking that turns you into like a 1-800 victim, even the call is free. That's where I went because I was so literal. I didn't understand that about myself. It's just I took everything word for word. And so it was kind of funny when I finally confronted somebody who wrote a lot of those songs. They were like clueless, or else they didn't want to admit to it that anything they said could have influenced you. But it also gave me encouragement in some points. And then the music led me to the same music with different kind of lyrics, which was gospel music. And that was my lyrical redemption. Was gospel music was telling me positive things and how to be an overcomer. And the question that I posed to the architect of Motown, who I met, was, well, if you just changed the word you in your songs to the word God, then they would have made sense. So that was
can't live without you, can't get over you. Yes, I see what you mean. that made me smile.
My whole world ended the day there's a song that's titled "My Whole World Ended the Moment You Left Me."
And I don't want to lead the people who are watching this astray. It's not like a Christian novel. It's a novel about finding meaning in your life, right? It's a novel about being lost, and also to me, it was a novel about how do you get over something really horrible that happened and kind of move past it, and how long and how many different iterations it takes of thinking about the world and trying different paths to get there.
Right. And I tried many, and all of them gave me something. And, you know, almost all memoirs have some element of spirituality to them that a person is looking for. It's not unusual. It's just, you know, I think everybody's looking for these same kinds of things. They look for love. People want to be loved. They want to be considered of value. They want to have hope in their lives. And, you know, a lot of us grow up in a situation where we're not given that when we're children. So we have to go out and find it. And that was how my journey, I never thought my journey would wind up that way, but that's the way it did.
And how did you decide what to include versus not, right? Like fiction, it's maybe obviously not, but like with memoir, you could have started and ended anywhere. So how did you decide, you know, where to start, where to end, and what didn't make it in?
Well, apart from the prologue, which sets the tone, when I was really like marinating on where to start the book, it came to me one day. My writing teacher always taught me, his name was Leonard Bishop, and he was just great. He said, start your book at the most exciting moment and then just work your way out from there. And so get the reader's attention. And so I remember I was on an airplane, and it came to me that the most exciting moment I could start my book to get everybody interested was when I was in an elevator being processed at Sybil Brand Jail for a pretty serious offense. And there were 3 girls in the elevator with me who wound up being the Manson girls. And the 4 of us all looked exactly alike. So that's where I start the book, at that moment. And it also, I didn't realize till I finished it, and I don't know how it is with novel writing, but I didn't realize how through the intuitive process that I work, where I started, I don't outline or anything. I mean, I know what happened. It's my life, right? But where I started actually wound up where I ended for me. With after everything that I went through, I almost got killed. I was a victim of domestic violence. You know, if I would have walked around the corner in my San Francisco neighborhood, I would have gone to People's Temple, and I wouldn't have not just died there. I would have been fixing the Kool-Aid and serving it to everybody else. So the end of
and
my
you're talking
book,
about the literal thing that happened with people going down to South America and the massive suicide and everything.
Jonestown, right? The mass suicide at Jonestown, for those who don't know what that was. And all the situations that I got in where I almost died, almost got killed, where people I know were murdered, but I wasn't. The end of my book and the beginning of my book were really the same. And I was standing in the elevator when I was 20 years old, looking at the Manson girls and trying to figure out what was the difference between us. And the difference was I'd never met Charles Manson, but the difference was also there, but for the grace of God go I. And I didn't even know what that meant then, because I wasn't any religious anything. But that's kind of what carried me through.
Talk about your cultural decoder, because I think this is fascinating. You sent it to me. And so I grew up outside the States. So I was alive in the 70s, but I wasn't in the United States. I had my whole childhood in the UK. And so some of the things, like we're just talking about,
Johnstown
and Manson, like, even though I heard them after the fact in the news, I didn't live them real time. And then you're going to have readers who are decades younger who were not around. So tell us a little bit about this cultural decoder that people can get their hands on.
Absolutely. It's free. It's on my website, SelimahNemoy.com. And what it is, the era that I lived through and that I write about, the 60s and the 70s and some of the 80s, had some incredible events happening that now, like, you go, well, I'm history, I am history. And when I realized that younger people would be reading it who hadn't had those experiences or lived in a different part of the United States and didn't, my spectrum of music is huge. It goes from like Van Morrison to Clara Ward. And, you'll have to figure out who Clara Ward is if you don't know. So I got the idea to create this cultural decoder, and it's free. You can go to my website and get it. And it goes chapter by chapter to PDF. And it links every historical reference, person, and cultural event and piece of music to something on Wikipedia or YouTube so that you can hear it, read about it, or find out what it was, instead of just having to go through and not know, what this was about. And that took a lot of weight off me as a writer, because it would have dragged out the story to have to explain everything. So that's free on my website. Anybody can go and get it.
Awesome. So any advice for people who might be starting out this journey? Like you say, lots of people have interesting stories, but very few can effectively write a great memoir like yours. So what would you say to people who are just starting, who are saying, maybe I should be trying to write my novel or my memoir? What advice would you give? What have you learned?
Well, I worked on a novel. I wrote 900 pages of a novel and I never finished it. So I'm not too good at telling you what to do with that. But if you're going to write anything, I would say this: just write. Just don't even think about where you're starting. Start wherever you feel led to start, with whatever you feel is the most interesting thing you can think of. If it's a memoir, it doesn't have to be chronological. You can backtrack if you need to. You can bring things in. But the most important thing, and you can do things completely out of the ordinary. Don't read a book and say you have to do it this way. The only thing that matters is that you keep the reader reading. Use the craft of books that you loved. Like when I would get stuck, I would go back and I would read little bits and pieces of books that I thought were great, or I would watch a video. Like there's a video of James Baldwin I would watch just to encourage myself about language and how to bring out emotion to people. As a writer, for me, I had journals that I kept from the time I was a teenager. So I was able to go to those to fill out the story. But I say to you, if you want to write, don't edit yourself. You can't edit what you didn't write. Write everything, then set it aside and go back and reread it. Then cut, then reread it, and then reread it again. And believe in yourself. Leonard used to say it's more important to believe in what you're doing than to know what you're doing. That's what I live by.
Oh, I like that. So let's show how they can connect with you if they'd like. And here's your website, SelimahNemoy.com. And you have a newsletter really frequently. I think that's probably the best way for people to keep in touch and follow and see what you're up to, right?
Yes, well, it's not just so much what I'm doing, but I send out content, book excerpts, videos. There's a lot of videos on my website of me doing ridiculous things and then other people doing stuff and music. And uh, it's a way to get content and inspiration and, just kind of encouragement throughout the week. Not throughout the week, but about every 2 weeks I write something. And then there's excerpts from the book and all kinds of other things you can play with when they're go on my website.
Thank you so much, Selimah, for joining me today.
Oh, bless you. Thank you so much. I wish we could have a real hug, but this virtual thing will carry us through till we
One day.
do.
One
Okay.
day.